This Is Gonna Hurt, written by A.I. Nasser, narrated by Tom Bowers.
This is gonna hurt.
Philip took a long drag from his cigarette as he stared off into space. The blisters on his hands were slowly starting to make themselves known, screaming at him with pain, but he fought it back. What he had achieved over the past few hours were worth all the pain in the world. His exhaustion didn't matter. What mattered was now. Only now. He took another drag and blew out smoke rings nonchalantly, knowing he had all the time in the world for the next steps. He crossed the open space of his garage, slowly counting his steps and watching the prints his feet made in the thick layer of dust that collected over the years. It had been years since he'd been down here. The nostalgia was refreshing. He had bought the house years before, back when he thought he had it all. He was supposed to get married here, have children, and raise them in a quiet neighborhood. A haven away from home, he had called it. Now, that seemed all in the past. His eyes watered when he thought about what could have been. The scratching of a chair against the floor brought him back to the present. He didn't turn around. He didn't need to. He knew all too well what was happening. It had taken months to prepare, and now that he was at the final stages of what he liked to call his final showdown, a sense of relief washed over him. Still, this wasn't going to be easy. The chair scratched again, and a muffled voice tried to say something. Philip took another drag, then flicked the cigarette aside.
You know, it's only gonna hurt more if you struggle. Try to relax.
A muffled shout answered him, and he smiled.
Yes, I know it's ironic.
He turned around and walked to where the sounds were coming from. His hand found a switch and flicked it on, the light from the fluorescent lamp throwing shadows across the walls. The figure greeting him winced at the sudden burst of light, turning its head as it tried to fight back the stinging that ensued. Philip grabbed his ex-girlfriend's face and brought it back around.
Sorry, but you're gonna need to be looking at me when we have our conversation.
Susan sat naked on the stool in front of him, hands tied behind her back and feet tied to the chair's legs. The gag in her mouth had been her bra, and her face was streaked with dirt lines from her earlier sobs. Her hair was cut short, a task Philip had taken upon him while she was still unconscious. She hadn't seen him coming. 2 nights before, he had found his way into her apartment using the spare key she kept hidden in a flower pot next to the door. He had waited for hours, knowing well enough that she wouldn't be back until midnight. He had made himself a sandwich, watched a little television, and then hid in her closet a few minutes before she was expected back. He had taken her in the shower. It was quick, meticulous, really. A quick blow to the head was all it took. Even if she had still been awake, the crack he heard her head make as it hit the bathtub would definitely have done the job. He had cut her hair, stitched the cut, then waited until it was dark enough to carry her out. She didn't even know it was him until now, and it showed in her eyes when they finally focused on him. Fueled with that, and the sudden knowledge that she was still nude, was enough for the rage in her to hit a maximum high. Instinct overtook her, and she tried to jump at him. For a single moment, she had forgotten that she was still tied to the chair. Philip watched her fall to the ground and smiled. He lit another cigarette and watched her squirm, her cries of outrage muffled by the lingerie in her mouth. He blew out smoke, then bent down and pulled her back up. The frown on her face was enough to make him laugh a little.
If you're not careful, you're going to need more stitches. Then how would we have a conversation?
She tried to lunge at him again, but with less enthusiasm, fully aware of what would happen if she tried too hard. She breathed heavily and tried to spit the bra from her mouth, shaking her head viciously when her initial efforts were fruitless.
All right,
Philip said, pulling up a chair and sitting across from her.
Just calm down and we'll get this out of the way.
He pulled the bra from her mouth and quickly pulled back when she tried to bite his hand, laughing.
What the fuck, Philip?
She tried to wrestle out of the ropes holding her.
Untie me, you son of a bitch!
Philip laughed again.
No, there won't be any of that. You're going to sit right there while we talk.
Talk? Are you out of your fucking mind?
Her outburst was rewarded by a quick slap. And because it felt good, he slapped her again, this time almost sending her to the floor one more time. Her cheek burned bright red, and he could see the anger boiling in her eyes when she looked back at him.
Untie me and try to do that again.
He grabbed her firmly by the lower jaw and leaned over, his face inches from hers.
You're in no position to make any threats, Susan. Not anymore.
She spit in his face, and when he slapped her this time, the chair toppled over. Her head hit the floor with a sickening thud, and she screamed in pain. Philip rubbed the sputum from his face and took a long drag from his cigarette before pulling her back up. A few of the stitches had come loose, and blood oozed down the side of her head. She had started crying, and he couldn't decide whether the tears or the blood concerned him more.
Let me go.
I said we need to talk.
She cried harder, and her head sank. She started shaking it slowly. He quickly pushed it back up.
You know what? Shut up. You don't have to say anything. I just want you to listen.
She slowly stopped and looked at him, unsure of what was coming next, but definitely giving him the attention he sought.
You know, at first, I wanted to call you up and meet. Maybe have a cup of coffee, talk about how you fucked up my life after we broke up. Then, the more I thought about it, the angrier I got. So I thought, this would be a lot better, at least for me. The satisfaction of seeing you tied up, helpless. Do you know how hard it is to get a job in this economy? Especially when your former boss is shooting down all your chances. It's a bitch. A real pain in the ass. I've been to over a dozen interviews, and as soon as I'm out, the rejection phone call is just minutes away. Do you know how that feels? Knowing that you'll never find work? Knowing you'll be evicted from your own house because you can't make the pay? Then you, top executive that you are, living the high life in your penthouse. Did he pay for that? Tell me, Susan, how much does prostituting yourself to top management get you these days?
Screw you.
Oh, Susan. Do you seriously want me to slap you again?
You were just another rung on the ladder, Philip. Do you actually think I cared what the hell would happen to you?
He stared back at her as he finished his cigarette, then used her thigh to put it out. She screamed with pain, instantly trying to pull back. He grabbed her leg and pressed his thumb on the scar, forcing more screams from her, then kicked her chair over.
You know, that lip of yours has always been your problem. At least when you were talking.
He could hear her crying as he walked away. He had met her early in his career. She was an intern at his firm, and he had quickly grown fond of her. She radiated confidence, adventure, and an allure that had all the male employees drooling over her. She worked hard under his supervision, got hired, and soon got into his bed. Knowing that their relationship would be frowned upon by top management, they worked hard at keeping it under wraps, despite her teasing. Within a year, they were headhunted and hired at a rival company that didn't seem to mind their intimacy. She had moved into his house, a present from wealthy parents who were proud of the obedient son following the path they wanted him to. Soon, Susan was promoted to lower management by his side, and things were starting to look great. He loved working with her. Their department was flourishing under their dual leadership, and in less than 6 months, they had doubled their company's profits. She worked just as hard as he did, and then more. She convinced him to take out a mortgage on his house, buy a new sports car, and live the life of the rich and wealthy. She loved the spotlight. Soon his attention wasn't enough, and he'd catch her flirting with other colleagues. He let it go, convincing himself that at the end of the day, she was sleeping in his bed. When that stopped happening, he confronted her, and she lashed out at him. It was the worst fight they had ever had. A week later, she was promoted to division head, and was quick to convince the board that he needed to go. His numbers didn't matter. The time he had spent slaving at work seemed to go unnoticed, and the only support he had turned out to be the reason why Susan was always coming home late.
Philip?
Her voice came, weak, from behind him. I lost everything because of you. My job, my house, everything. I had to start from scratch, with no chance of getting hired into the same career once your boyfriend spread the word.
Philip, I'm bleeding.
He lit another cigarette, then walked back to where she lay, upturned and tied to the chair. Blood had begun to collect around her head, and she was looking paler.
Do you remember what happened when I came to ask you for help?
Please, I'm hurting.
She began to cry again. He ran a hand across her forehead and wiped a tear from across her cheek.
That's the point, baby. Now, tell me what you said to me when I came to you for help.
She began to cry harder.
Tell me!
That I didn't care!
She turned her head to the side, and he could see that a few more stitches had broken. She was losing quite a bit of blood.
That's right. You kicked me out. I lost everything because of you, and you wouldn't even tell them to stop harassing me.
He turned her head back and looked into her eyes.
You threw a hammer at me, Susan. Do you remember that? When I wouldn't go, you threw a hammer at me. I had to drive to the hospital with blood dripping into my eyes, and you still didn't budge.
Philip, please.
What had I ever done to you?
He got up again and walked to a side, out of the light. In a corner, he found his toolkit and opened it.
Philip?
He saw the surprise on her face as he stepped back from the shadows and walked towards her.
Oh God, no!
She had forgotten about the pain and was squirming again, her eyes fixed on the hammer in his hand.
Philip, no! Please, no!
Without breaking a stride, he walked up to her and slammed the hammer down on her head.